John Carrington, and this is Eye on Baltimore. We're going to have a great program for you, chock full of information and fun things to learn about. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. Don't touch that remote. We'll be right back.
I'm nuts about downtown Baltimore's West Side. Hello, I'm John Waters, and I'm proud to say that Baltimore has always been my home. It's the inspiration behind all my films, including Hairspray, Crybaby, Serial Mom, and A Dirty Shame. Let me tell you, there are not a more eccentric, monumental, eclectic, intriguing, and character-filled 28 blocks anywhere in the world, and I'm here to prove it to you. This is where Babe Ruth was born. They tell me he's the best baseball player ever. Not that I'd know. I'm more into theater. Like nearby Arena Players, the nation's longest continuously running African-American community theater. I'm also a big fan of century-old Antique Row, where New York dealers come to buy and later mark up their purchases sky high for their Manhattan buyers. On that same block sits the U.B. Blake National Jazz Institute, housing memorabilia from Baltimore jazz greats like Billie Holiday and, of course, U.B. himself. The West Side is also where the Maryland Historical Society calls home, with its many Baltimore artifacts, including the original manuscript of the Star-Spangled Banner and Nipper, the RCA dog. Infectious, fashionable, full of vim and Baltimore vigor, I walk the West Side streets these days in amazement at what it's become. I'm nuts about downtown Baltimore's West Side. You will be, too.
And welcome back. And I'm John Carrington, and I'm speaking with Mr. Dick Lawn, who is the director of String of Pearls. Mr. Lawn, explain what String of Pearls is.
String of Pearls project is a way to honor people who've protected land in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, which is 6 states in the District of Columbia. Why it's so important to protect land is that when you protect land, you're protecting the bay. People think that maybe somehow by a miracle you can protect the water by magic. But really what happens on the land happens in the water.
So you're really protecting our livelihood, the economy of Maryland, because there's a fishery industry that depends upon that bay.
Well, what runs off from the land is what the problems are in Chesapeake Bay. That's the problems we've been facing ever since John Smith rolled in.
So it's the landowners who can help us protect our bay.
They're the ones. They're the ones that control the property, and what they do, whether they choose to develop their property or to preserve it, will determine how healthy the bay is.
Mm-hmm. What can each and every one of us do?
Well, in our own homes, we can see that stormwater doesn't run off, that we don't use pesticides that run off, that we recycle. It's all the things we know about. It's those things. Mm-hmm. But as far as properties, acreages, the people that have large tracts of acreages, that can help the bay a lot. Pearls have been as small as 3 acres, 2 acres, and as large as 3,000. Mm. So anything can be a pearl.
So your goal is to recognize the people who are protecting the land. What did you do at the last event to recognize these folks?
Well, what we do is we have ceremonies, and at the ceremonies, there are citations from the governor praising the landowners from what they've done, from the Maryland legislature. Politicians always attend to present to honor, and Neighbors and friends are there to recognize them and to celebrate what they've done. The most important thing that happens at a ceremony is that there's a register of pearls of Chesapeake Bay. And in this register, every landowner or organization that preserves property writes their name, signs their name with their pearl. And this is a living, enduring legacy for what they've done. So we've found that people really want to be recognized and remembered for what they've done. And this is a way of doing it, this register.
What has been your biggest challenge in keeping the String of Pearls project going?
The biggest challenge is manpower to find all the pearls. What we are is we're intermediaries with land trusts. We work with land trusts. For example, if you had a piece of property, let's say you had 30 acres of land, and there was a consideration that you might want to put an easement, a conservation easement on that land. I'll explain what a conservation easement is. In order to do that, the reason you would do that is that you would get a tax benefit from doing that. And what a conservation easement would mean is that you would take it out of development. That land would be protected forever in its natural state. And it couldn't be developed. In return for that, you get a tax benefit, because before you made that commitment, and it's in the deed to the property now, before you made that commitment, you could have houses, whatever the zoning is that's required, you could do. So you're giving up something, and on the other hand, you're benefiting. That's one reason that people save land and put easements on their property.
Before our interview, we were talking, you mentioned a word that is oftentimes misunderstood. The word is watershed. Would you explain to our viewers what the watershed is? In fact, we'll be right back with more with Mr. Lon in a moment. All right, welcome back to Eye on Baltimore, and we're talking with Mr. Dick Lon here, who is from the Watershed Project. It's called String of Pearls, and it helps us to keep our Chesapeake Bay in great shape. Mr. Lon, we mentioned the word watershed. Could you explain exactly what that means?
Watershed is an area where if rain falls anywhere within that area, it comes out into one particular, drains out into one particular place. The Chesapeake Bay watershed consists of 6 states: New York, New Jersey, not New Jersey.
Thank goodness. All right. Oh, New Jersey, we pray for those folks and all the damage that occurred as a result of the hurricane and the superstorm. Oh my goodness. So, all right, keep going, sir.
The 6 states are New York, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, and the District of Columbia. Parts of all those states are in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, meaning if a drop of rain dropped within the geography of those states, and by gravity it would migrate its way into Chesapeake Bay. That's the definition of a watershed. There are watersheds at lots of different levels. Patuxent River, Patapsco River, they all have watersheds. And a lot of these rivers go into Chesapeake Bay. There's a different categorizations of how waters are related. You can think of watersheds like veins in your body, arteries in your body, and how the blood flows and how it all progresses. It's an analogy of thinking about how water goes in a system. It's a system of geography.
And of course, Baltimore City adds to the water that flows through the watershed. What is our impact?
Everybody's in a watershed. In Anne Arundel County, there was a survey. The survey question was, do you live in a watershed? And 17% said yes. So actually, the answer is 100% of everybody live in a watershed. People don't know what a watershed is. And that's why it's important to understand, because we're all in this watershed together. So what happens in Cooperstown, New York affects Chesapeake Bay. What happens in Baltimore City in a storm drain and oil being spilled affects Chesapeake Bay. It all drains. Think about the drains in your house.
All right, well, now when we have a snowstorm, we put all this salt on the road in Baltimore City. That's an awful lot of salt. What is that impact?
Well, it's probably coming down to the rivers and probably killing fish.
So what can we as the average person living in Baltimore do to help?
Well, the answers aren't easy. The answer is to think about what your impact is. What is your impact on harsh detergents you use in the house, on pesticides you use, on fertilizers you use, on runoff from your house? Are you capturing the runoff from your house? Because if you let all the water run off from your property, it's going to go down the street. We've designed all our streets to kill Chesapeake Bay.
Oh my goodness, there's so much that we're doing through ignorance, not knowing what a watershed is, and then doing things that literally kill the watershed. What can our legislators do? What can the people at the next level do to help?
Well, stormwater legislation and stormwater regulation is really important. In other words, getting control of stormwater, which is to try to hold stormwater back from going into the streams, is what's so important. If you take a typical road, has, you're dripping oil, you're having all these wastes and all these byproducts that come from automobiles and cars. Plus you have air pollution that's being dissolved, falling down on roads, and it's all getting swept down into the streams and into the bay. The solution is that every homeowner has a responsibility to hold all the water on their property.
All right, well, Mr. Lawn, you are not alone in this fight. Who are some of the people who are working with you in the project, and who are the others who are out, like, with other organizations that are relevant to?
Oh, there are many organizations. Chesapeake Bay Foundation, Department of Natural Resources in Maryland, every one of the states that I mentioned have Department of Natural Resources. They all work on this issue at the federal level. There's EPA, there's a pollution diet for Chesapeake Bay. I think I'm kind of getting off the track of my project. The project is to protect land to save the bay. What I think is what's really going to be the turnaround for Chesapeake Bay is when people are affected personally by health on Chesapeake Bay. To me, the fact that every time it rains you can't go swimming in Chesapeake Bay should give a clue that something's wrong.
You said we have to hold the water to our property. How can that be done?
Well, you can build rain gardens. I'll give you a couple. They're rain barrels where you can catch the water that runs down from your gutters. You can build rain gardens. If you look at the landscape and the way your property drains, and where you see runoff is, and create gardens that catch the water so that the water goes into the ground. You want the water to go into the ground, you don't want it to run off. A lot of times grass is called green concrete because it's not a great it doesn't suck up enough water to put it into the ground. But if you can create gardens there and put the water in, that's another way you can do it.
Anytime we're putting water into the ground, we're saving the Chesapeake Bay.
Exactly. That's what stormwater legislation is about, to try to protect stormwater, rainwater from going into the bay.
Future events, what do you have planned?
Well, we try to have 2 or 3 events a year to honor landowners who preserve property. The next event's going to be in March. It'll probably be the end of March, and it'll be the lower 3 counties on the eastern shore. We've covered Anne Arundel County and honored, we have about 25 or more pearls already. And we've covered on the eastern shore the upper counties, Cecil, Kent, Queen Anne's, and we've covered Talbot County, and now we're going to do the lower counties, Worcester, and the lower counties will be in March, and we expect to have a lot. We'll probably have the ceremony in Easton.
Well, we're going to take a break, and we'll be back with more of Eye on Baltimore. All right, welcome back to Eye on Baltimore, and I mean, this has really been a classroom for me. I've learned so much. Number one, if we just put a simple garden on our property, that absorbs the water. Number two, our roads are destroying the Chesapeake Bay. Our water and the runoff runs right down into the bay, and the roads are created to destroy the bay. Oh, that was well, I'm enlightened. I know better now. And number three, the salt that we throw on the road is killing the fish. Is there anything else you want to add to the lessons that I've learned so far?
Well, we think the number one way that we can contribute to protecting the bay is to honor people who preserve land.
And how can our listeners, our viewers, help you in that regard?
If they know people that have land who might be interested in putting it under protection, for putting conservation easements on their property, they should get in touch with us. That would be a good
Can
way.
you use volunteers and money to help buy the recognition for these individuals?
Well, we recognize them.
What exactly is a land easement?
Well, there are a lot of ways that people can protect properties, and every piece of property has its own story as to why it was protected. The two main ways they're protected is, one, there's an out and out contribution of land to a public agency, a donation of land. But by and large, the biggest way land is protected is through conservation easements. In other words, and the conservation easement looks something like this. I have 100 acres of land. I'm sitting on, my house is on a half an acre of land. I can do whatever I want to do on my half an acre, but the other 99 and a half acres I'm going to protect, and I'm never going to touch them. I write that into the deed on my property. In return for that, I get a tax write-off for the giving up those development rights of those 99 and a half acres. And the people who negotiate the working of these arrangements are land trusts. There's a state of Maryland land trust, and there are private land trusts. Around here, for example, where I'm from, near Annapolis, there's the Maryland Environmental Trust, which operates in the whole state of Maryland. And there's also the Scenic Rivers Land Trust, which is a private land trust. On the Eastern Shore, there's the Eastern Shore Land Conservancy, which is a very big and very highly successful land trust. And they're the people who talk to the people, to the landowners, and try to make arrangements for protecting the land. Most important thing, there really isn't government involved in this. You might wonder, how do I know these people are going to protect the land? The easement is given, it's written into the deed of the property, but the land trust has to come back periodically and check to make sure that the people are upholding their end of the bargain.
Mm-hmm. All right. Can you give us some success stories, people who granted land to be protected?
Well, on the Magathie River, I'll give you a success story. There's a captain, actually he was a Bay pilot, and when he retired he owned 3 acres of land up on the Magathie, and he worked to get it protected, and in the process of getting it protected, they created the Magathie River Land Trust, and they've protected ever since that little 3 acres of property was protected. They've now protected, I think, over 500 acres on the Magathie River.
Beautiful, beautiful.
On the Eastern Shore, Louisa Dumling, who was in the DuPont family and a big landowner of Andelow Farm outside of Chestertown, owned about close to 3,000 acres of land. She has an operating farm there. Mm-hmm. It's still operating. Remember, when you put an easement on your property, you still, mm-hmm. you can still do, depending upon how the easement is written, you don't give up the property. It's still your property. You just can't do certain things on it. Well, she protected 3,000 acres, 10 miles on Chesapeake Bay.
All right, well, we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back with more of Mr. Dick Long. right, well, we've had a wonderful time talking to Dick Lawn, who's the director of the String of Pearls project for the Chesapeake Bay. It's a wonderful program to help preserve our watershed. And I'd like to thank Mr. Lawn for being a part of the program. Thank you, sir. And are there any contact numbers that people need to know in order to reach you to lend their support?
You can go to our website, which is www.stringofpearls.org, or contact me directly, which is Dick Lawn, DICKLAHN, @gmail.com.
All right. Well, I want to thank you, Mr. Lawn, for giving us so much information about protecting our Chesapeake Bay and the watershed that supports it. And I want to thank you for being a part of Eye on Baltimore. And I'm going to keep my eye on you, sir, because I want to be protected. I want to drink clean water, and I want to be able to eat crabs and fish and oysters and clams from the Chesapeake Bay. And, sir, you're a part of that whole reason that bay exists. And I want to thank you ever so much for being a part of Eye on Baltimore. And until next time, keep your eye on this show and Eye on Baltimore. Thank you, sir. It's really a pleasure to work with you. Well, we've had another edition of Eye on Baltimore. I'm John Carrington, and I hope you learned something. I did. It's really affected me. So until next time, keep your eye on Baltimore. Bye-bye.